should wake to a man-dead world, where virtually all human life had been dissolved from the face of the earth, leaving behind only buildings, bridges, machines. If you should awake to such a world tomorrow morning, what would you do? Where would you go?
It's like some contagious disease.
Crescendo, the final chapters of Journeys Out of the Body, where we're going to set the record straight, damn it. This is still the beginning of a very long journey, but we must set the record straight. So, sorry about the late start. I usually start at 9 o'clock, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter anyways, but you know, I did the classic Windows update, which is a mistake, always a mistake to do the Windows update as soon as it comes out. I tell myself every time not to do it, don't do it, but I do it anyways. Like I have some kind of faith in Microsoft, as if they aren't going to screw up my computer every time. It's kind of like, you know, when you take a vaccine that just came out, you know. Anyways, we're going to get to the end of this thing. So after all of, by the way, if you want to jump, if you're in the Discord and you want to jump in and hang with us, you can. I got my brother Alan in here. I've got Bryce as always. I don't know if Wolf's going to jump in or not, but also you can chime in the chat or whatever you feel like doing tonight. So this first book is kind of monumental because this was when Robert Monroe was really notating all of the stuff that first started happening to him when he had his OBE experiences, and now it to him it's just like one big science experiment. But what I've realized is some of the stuff that I thought that was in the first book was actually in the second book. But here's where we're at. In chapter 20 is called Inconclusive. So after everything that he's been through, he still has this chapter called Inconclusive. the unknown. It's still a void at this point, okay? And so he goes on to say, after all these years, let me make sure I got this lit up first. Okay. After all these years, I still do not know how and why this departure from the norm took place. On the surface, there is no easily determined cause. Medical and mental sciences offer no certain answers, which has made me alternately resentful, sad, and thankful. Resentful in that my faith in the scope and breadth of modern scientific achievement has been badly shaken. Sad because full-scale development of directly related knowledge is not likely to come in my physical lifetime. And thankful for the few scientists of our time who are brave enough to consider objectively concepts which may negate years of study as well as long ingrained religious and ethical beliefs. I feel kind of sad for him now, reading that, actually. But this is just the first book again, okay? So therefore, if no current scientific theory fits without an inordinate amount of pushing, pulling, twisting, and squeezing, it seems reasonable to propound a premise that does seem to work. After all, one can prove that man is nothing more than a few gallons of tainted water. Only extreme pressure is needed to fit the phenomenon to the theory. The following premise, unacceptable as it may be to our present state of enlightenment, deserves consideration. No other offers more explanations and leaves less unanswered. This is not to say that it is necessarily valid. Only future events can determine its validity. Conversely, there is no known theory to prove it false. The basis of the premise is certainly not original here, but its application is. So here's the question. What happens to the laboratory animal once the experiment is completed? I think he's talking about himself here. But in a universe populated with sentient beings of great variety, the planetary environment germinating life follows a typical pattern. The prime requirement is a diffusing and restraining shield that envelops the entire planet. When the shield is formed through the normal evolution of the planet matter, the fundamental requirement for animate life is present. The shield is composed of gases and liquids of sufficient density to 1. Deflect, filter, and/or convert radiation from the parent and nearby stars to a point of tolerance needed for animal life, and 2. Maintain internally generated planetary heat at an average level within the limits required for the biochemical process. This is a pretty good theory, by the way. When I first read this and heard this, what's up, MJ? I thought, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Once developed, he's talking about how the planet comes into being. Once developed, the shield permits only filtered light and reduced radiation to reach the surface of the planet. Visibility is limited strictly to nearby objects on the surface and vertically to less than 1/10 the diameter of the planetary body. No distant stars, moons, or other planets can be seen. At most, the indistinct glow of the parent sun may be seen occasionally, moving from horizon to horizon as the planet rotates. In this environment, animate physical life generates and evolves in a broadening cycle. Where no such shield has developed and remained for a significant period, no animate physical life can be present. Where the shield has decayed or drained off into space, life has deteriorated and died unless intellectual knowledge is sufficient to develop and install an artificial environment. The accepted premise, then, is that all planetary bodies fall into two categories: shielded and unshielded. On the translucently shielded planets, animate physical life may evolve. The unshielded stay barren, devoid of anything but inorganic matter. Only in very rare instances are there any deviations from this rule. I mean, where is he getting this from? Is this all theory? I think this is all theory. I think. It sounds like it's all theory. It's still good theory, though. Evolving sentient life in these conditions becomes aware of and utilizes first those natural forces directly perceived. And such forces in the order of perception and application are 1. Psionic, or creative thought energy, 2. Biochemical, 3. Nuclear, and 4. Gravitational. Electromagnetism is employed sparingly and remains more as a byproduct of other force applications, much like the smoke from a useful fire. The primary needs of these evolving life forms are met through development of the psi force. The first of these needs communication, is an automatic birthright transmission and reception of information from individual to individual, or from one group to another, knows no time spatiality. Through experience and education, proficiency is gained in other applications of psi, such as movement and conversion of matter, direction and control of lesser species, and communication and association with those in the realms of non-physical matter. Now, here's the thing too. Like, I know this is all theory, but this is exactly like if you read Manly P. Hall's. Manly P. Hall has a book where he talks about the history of mankind and how man developed from an etheric being into a physical being, and then eventually we're supposed to go back to this etheric being. Now, I don't think that Robert Monroe studied Manly P. Hall. I could be wrong, but what he's saying here in his theory of life on the planet or whatever, it kind of lines up with that. So as the intelligent life forms develop into societies and civilizations, the understanding and knowledge of the remaining available forces come quite naturally. Typical, they are the result of the individuals and the society's desire to be relieved of the tedium of constant and continuous use of this psi force. So too much damn thought force moving around. It gets crazy. What up, Dan? Dale? What's up, Dale? I haven't seen you in a minute. If you're the same guy I'm thinking of. So, as the intelligent life forms develop into societies and civilizations, okay, so typically they are the result of individuals and the society's desire to be relieved from all this psi force. Thus, mechanical means are created to produce body nourishment, to master and control the planetary environment, to transport matter, to multiply motion, and to even modulate and amplify the psi force, which is, still lines up with what Manly P. Hall teaches too. Through the non-matter perceptiveness of psi, the remaining forces are quickly adapted and harnessed to these needs. It is probable that at this stage, the society achieves its first rational contact with other societies beyond the confines of its native planet, and with the inhabitants of the non-physical world. Trippy, man. With this final step to maturity, the social organization is merged into the infinitely larger whole of intergalactic society. It is no coincidence that inconvertible knowledge of the relationship of the totality of the Creator is the major product of this union. Gone immediately are misdirected fantasies and conjecture. The standards under which intelligent life may evolve and expand are woven inextricably into the rules and laws of energy and applied with equal rigor. In the distant past, many of these social organizations had become aware of low-order psi-force emanations from the outer rim of an obscure galaxy. Where the hell is this coming from? I'm sorry, but this is coming out of left field. The title of this chapter is inconclusive, by the way. So he's going into this whole theory of the planets and the universe and life and all this stuff right now. So at first, this phenomena evoked only minor interest, both qualitatively and quantitatively. It seemed to be more than subintelligent animal transmission. However, an idle technician happened to process the raw incoming psi noise through a random sorter out of mild curiosity, and to his surprise, infrequent flashes of applied psi appeared on the counter. Intrigued by the oddity, a psi probe was made of the area. As suspected, the birth of a new society was unfolding, and excited by the discovery of such an unusual event, the standard psi communications for new societies was transmitted. Strangely, no reply was received. Successive transmissions brought the same result, and here indeed was a rarity. An ecological team was dispatched to investigate physically this anomaly. The researchers discovered the source to be the third planet in a Class 10 star system, and as they orbited the planet itself, measurements and observation indicated that it did not follow the norm for propagation of intelligent life. The gaseous planetary envelope did not possess the usual, unbroken, high filtration characteristics. This evidently permitted unusually large amounts of radiation to reach the surface, even to the point where the sun was clearly visible from the surface itself, as well as distant planets and stars when viewed from the shadowed side. Further, due to high rotational speed and other factors, a magnetic field of great intensity pervaded the entire planet. This, coupled with the unusual radiation element, appeared to exert profound influences upon the infant society. Starting to sound like Robert Monroe was around when this planet was made, doesn't it? What's up, Dean Bean Cooter? Luckily, one member of the visiting group had worked extensively in the art of personal psi shielding. It was he who offered to establish physical contact on the planet itself, and this was done while the others waited patiently in a shelter on the planet's barren and brittle satellite. Was that the moon? The visit itself proved the inadequacy of his training under extreme conditions. The investigator returned a short time later in a state of mental exhaustion. He had, however, been able to make contact at several points around the surface. It was true. A new society was in the making, but under unimaginable restraints. There was no knowledge, understanding, or use of the psi force whatsoever. And when psi communication was attempted, the inhabitants either fled in panic or prostrated themselves and emanated strong psi reactions to the effect that they were in the presence of the Creator. Paradoxically, careful psi probes found occasional glimmerings of the universal laws in the minds of these individuals, which conclusively proved that the seed had truly been sown, that this was intended to develop into a social structure according to the plan, whatever the environment. With this knowledge, the research team returned to their own society to ponder the problem. In later periods, other, better equipped investigators visited and observed this struggling intelligent life from time to time. I'm starting to really smell what he's stepping in here. All visits were performed within the rules which applied to the infant society so that no direct support was given that would instigate dominance of one culture over another. Yeah, you can't forget about the prime directive, can we, Spock? Infrequently, intelligent applications of psi were found at the individual level, and this was encouraged. Still, in spite of all precautions, it was ascertained that actual visits only reinforced the myths and legends that had sprung up as a result of previous contacts. It was the exception that objective response was obtained from an individual via psi probe. None of these responses extended to common practice. In recent periods, the situation has altered significantly. Routine psi monitoring plus referential advice from non-matter intelligences show that the society in question has surprisingly entered the nuclear stage while still in the biochemical. Applications of nuclear force inevitably led to gravitics, which presumes historically the early prospect of interstellar travel. Without complete understanding of psi force fields, contact with other social organizations by the new non-psi society could be disastrous. If interstellar physical travel is achieved, such contacts are a certainty. With this prospect in view, research groups have increased their efforts at contact without a serious effect upon the dynamics of the new society. It is difficult in that the same obstacles are present. The continuing interpretation of divinity orientation persists. Some who are contacted by psi probes still lose their ability to reason and are isolated as sufferers of some disease. Any lasting psi communication pattern is usually labeled as unreality or a dream, or a term used by the society to identify uncoordinated psi activity during recharging periods, which are similar to that found among infants in normal social cultures. Most frustrating are attempts to communicate with the intellectual leaders. Without exception, these have been unsuccessful. Research suggests that it is to be the result of total concentration in the study of matter, historical rejection of all psi force phenomena, and inability to comprehend any communication other than the perceived or what's perceived by the sensors of light, sound, or vibration of the gaseous envelope, and variations in electromagnetic radiation, mechanically generated and translated. The only minimal success has been with individuals without inhibitory or scientific training. So he's calling scientific training inhibitory to people that use their consciousness or their psi, powers or whatever. What's up? Don't watch. I like that handle. With little to unlearn and no prestige loss to be suffered, productive exchange of rational thought has been accomplished in several of these relatively uneducated inhabitants. Unfortunately, the interpretation given the data received by such untrained minds is often highly distorted. Further, the guiding authorities of the young society dismiss the testimony and claims of such people by reason of their ignorance. The work still continues. High-level Psi-Force radiation equipment is being employed in the hope of a breakthrough to the society members during their waking active state, and any individuals who possess some degree of intellect, coupled with objective curiosity, are being taught, sometimes painfully, the basics of Psi-Force techniques. Others are being taken out of their environment temporarily, either as dense particle matter or as psi entities, to be tested and examined for clues to the solution of the problem. No direct action will be taken. This is in keeping with the rules of preservation as they apply to all lesser social organizations. It is a fact, many times proved, that such subclassifications are consistently lost when contact is made with more advanced societies. That whole thing right there that we just read. I don't know how much you paid attention to it. At all. Bryce, did you pick up any of that? Like, did you pay attention to any of that? It lost me in a few spots, but I think I understand where it's coming from. That whole thing was Robert Monroe's hypothesis of how the Earth came to be and how our society came to be. That's his hypothesis. It sounds like he's into aliens, doesn't it? I think it is. What do you think? Sorry, I stepped on you a little bit.
Oh yeah, I'm not. I can't really. I'm having a hard time following it.
No comment.
Yeah,
right.
No comment.
Okay, so basically, long story short, what Robert Monroe is saying is that this has been one.
It sounded very Star Trek.
Yeah, it sounded like Star Trek, didn't it? It's one big, like the Earth is one big social experiment that started out as what Manly P. Hall described as spiritual etheric beings that eventually use the environment of the Earth and turn themselves into physical beings. But now they've gotten to the point where their psi abilities, like out-of-body experiences, not telekinesis, but what's the other one? ESP, all that stuff, all this psi abilities are either scary or out of the norm or religious. And yet, there's some kind of experiment that's still going on here. And he says the details of this hypothesis may be wrong, the motivation's different, but the basis may not be at all far from reality. We may in fact be no more than interesting laboratory animals, to quote them, and he has them in quotation marks, useful in various experiments, but not much more. And if such communication and or experimentation was and is now being attempted, it could account for much that is left unanswered in our human history. Certainly, it would widely cut across past, present theological beliefs as events ascribed to God, and his assistants in whatever form would assume a more prosaic status. The life sciences, especially those relating to the mind, personality, and neurological functions, would have to undergo a major overhauling. Both mental and physical diseases would perhaps be understood with exact knowledge, replacing the vague assumptions now prevalent. But most adaptable would be the physical sciences. Here, experimentation and extrapolation would be a relatively simple matter, with new information and theories built upon fairly solid foundations. On a personal level, the hypothesis described above may offer a reasonable answer to much of my own experience, Robert's experience. What's up, Wolf? What's up, Lisa? Robo? This is all Robert. Don't put this on me. This is all Robert Monroe's theory. I think it's a pretty good one, though, actually. A point-by-point re-examination would be necessary to bring into focus the proper relationship in each circumstance. Like the philosopher, psychiatrist, and others who have spent many years of experimentation, training, and development along a particular concept vector, I am loath to change course still again. Yet the following experiences cannot be totally ignored. They occurred in the early period of experimentation and are taken almost verbatim from the notes. September 9th, 1960, nighttime. I was lying in a north-south position when I suddenly felt bathed and transfixed by a very powerful beam that seemed to come from the north about 30 degrees above the horizon. I was completely powerless with no will of my own, and I felt as if I were in the presence of a very strong force in personal contact with it. It had intelligence of a form beyond my comprehension, and it came directly down the beam, into my head, and seemed to be searching every memory in my mind. I was truly frightened because I was powerless to do anything about this intrusion. This intelligent force entered my head just above the forehead and offered no calming thoughts or words. It didn't seem to be aware of any of my feelings or emotions. It was looking impersonally, hurriedly, and definitively for something specific in my mind. After a while, perhaps only moments, it left, and I reintegrated into the physical body, arose shaken, and went outside for some fresh air. That's pretty freaking scary. Something just went in his head and started looking for something, regardless of what he thought, felt, or, September 16th, 1960, nighttime. The same impersonal probing, the same power from the same angle. However, this time, I received the firm impression that I was inextricably bound by loyalty to this intelligent force, always had been, and that I had a job to perform here on Earth. The job was not necessarily to my liking, but I was assigned to it. The impression was that I was manning a pumping station, and he has that in quotation marks, that it was a dirty, ordinary job, but it was mine, and I was stuck with it, and nothing, absolutely nothing, could alter the situation. I got the impression of huge pipes, so ancient they were covered with undergrowth and rust. Something like oil was passing through them, but it was much higher in energy than oil, and vitally needed and valuable elsewhere. Now, this is an assumption, not on this material planet. But this has been going on for eons of time, and there were other force groups here taking out the same material on some highly competitive basis, and the material was convertible at some distant point or civilization for something very valuable to entities far above my ability to understand. Again, the intelligence force moved out and away quickly, and the visitation ended. I got up after a bit feeling depressed and went into the bathroom in our house and actually felt I should wash my hands after working, although my hands were clean. So this thing digs in his mind again, right? Goes into his mind, and now he's got the impression that he's working on this pump. It sounds like Spice Fields and Dune or something, but he's actually working on some pump somewhere for this substance that's high energy, kind of like we do here for oil, but that beings that he has no idea that he's super loyal to are going to be using it. Again, this is just an experience. It doesn't mean it's true, but that's a pretty far, like, right turn, left turn. I don't even know how that would even come from his unconscious. Like, that's kind of crazy. Anyways, next one. September 30th, 1960, nighttime. The same pattern as on September the 16th. Again, there was the feeling of being the pumping station attendant, the approach of the entity down the beam, and the search of my mind. This time even to see what specifically controlled my breathing apparatus. I seemed to understand that the entity was looking for some substance that might permit breathing in Earth's atmosphere, and a picture was shown in my mind of a pouch, possibly 2 by 3 inches and 1 inch thick, hung on a belt at the waist, with the statement, in quotations, "This is how we are breathing now." This gave me courage to try to truly to communicate. I mentally said, orally also, like asking a question in his mind to the being, orally also, asked who they were, and received an answer that I could not translate or understand. Then I felt them beginning to leave, and I asked for some actual indication that they had been there, but was rewarded only with paternal amusement. Then they seemed to soar up into the sky, while I called after them, pleading. Then I was sure that their mentality and intelligence were far beyond my understanding. It is an impersonal, cold intelligence with none of the emotions of love or compassion which we respect so much. Yet this may be the omnipotence that we call God. And visits such as these in mankind's past could well have been the basis for all of our religious beliefs, and our knowledge today could provide no better answers than we could 1,000 years ago. By this time, it was getting light, and I sat down and cried, a great deep sobs as I have never cried before. Because then I knew without any qualification or future hope of change that the God of my childhood, of the churches, of religion throughout the world, was not as we worshipped him to be, and that for the rest of my life I would, quote, suffer the loss of this illusion. Are we then just leftover laboratory animals? Or perhaps the experiment is still in process? Ooh. There is a guy that I had on the show that's going around saying that that's all we are, is some big lab experiment. I forget the guy's name. It's Mike. Anybody know his name? Mike something. He was on the show before, but another thing too is like for him to, if he really sat down and sobbed and cried and all this stuff and let go of this idea of the religious God that he was brought up to believe in, like if he let go of that idea, then that means that at the very least these experiences that he just notated here that he had felt pretty damn real. You know, doesn't mean they are real. It just means to him that they felt real, you know. Into the chat. Let's see what's up. Does raw intellect have any value on the other side? Apparently it does. How would an entity on another interpret 3-eye atlas? I don't know. We ain't gonna know jack about 3-eye atlas till it gets here. I mean, it is a kind of a weird thing. Yeah, so this is kind of sad. I mean, honestly, reading those words, it's kind of sad. Like, we all have, even I do. Most of us, we have this idea of this loving God creator, right? That's what we were taught. We've been taught that since we were a kid. I've had moments in my life where I've had complete faith in God and everything, and it's changed my life for the better. It changes people's life. But is it just the faith alone that's changing their life, or is it God, right? And so, like, for a grown man like Robert, all I'm saying is for a grown man like this guy, who claims to be a strong, mentally strong dude, to break down and cry because he really believes in his heart he has to let this whole illusion go, you know. He says here, for the rest of my life I would suffer, and he has suffer in quotation marks, the loss of this illusion. It's pretty scary. Good day, Sudi. Sudi just jumped on in. Now it's a party. All right, so premises, a rationale. So for those who are knowledgeable in the humanities, the material contained herein may seem to be the continuation of a line of thought that has persisted for thousands of years. And so it is. Why then does it become important now? The first response is this material has not come from readings and studies of the past. Rather, it has been and is taking place in the mid-20th century. Comparison came after the fact. And if validity does exist here, it is possible that modern technology, through serious, organized investigation and research into the second body postulate, could provide mankind with a quantum jump as great or greater than the Copernican revolution. It could be the crack that becomes a door, that becomes a gateway that opens into a new era in man's history. So the premise is the scope of existing man, partially because of our intensely materialistic society. Again, he sounds like Manly P. Hall here, doesn't he? Manly P. Hall used to say that how materialistic we are. We are super materialistic. We have become accustomed and conditioned to the concept that the human entity ultimately lies within the bonds of the physical body. Therefore, the periphery of the living human entity, the rim of that area which it affects and is affected by it, extends beyond the physical body and the conscious mind. The composition of this area is neither material nor motor, but of thought and emotion. The transmission and reception of affecting data is continuous, operating at both the conscious and non-conscious levels during every living moment, awake or asleep. Data received by the human entity in this manner can be beneficial or destructive, according to the interpretation put upon by the non-conscious mind. Reactions to this constant data input may be found in the varying mental and physical states of the individual. For example, the periphery extends as far as a distant friend. The friend thinks of you, objectively or emotionally. Unaccountably, at the very same moment, he comes to your mind without a related memory association to suggest or trigger the response. This takes place so casually and so frequently that we are unaware of its significance. And he's right, that shit happens all the time. It really does. Now compound this with the almost infinite complexities and variations in the present and past human relationships of an individual. Only then can one begin to perceive the volume and diversity of data received. The Christian ethic seems to be an attempt to explain this fact in a non-objective parable. The thoughts of you impressed upon by you, by neighbor, friend, and enemy significantly affect your mental self, and through this channel are reflected in the physical body. It becomes clear, too, that the individual with wide, continuing experience in human relationships will receive a greater affecting input directly in proportion to such experience. For the leaders of the world, who are exposed to input from millions of people, charged with emotions either benign or malignant, the burden is incalculable. Consider, too, that what you engender in others thus feeds back to you. Try to visualize an invisible nerve network extending from you to every person that you've ever met. Signals, or thoughts, constantly travel along this network to and from you. And from those who think of you, frequently, consciously, or otherwise, there extends a strong, well-circuited channel of communication. At the other end of the frequency are those who may think of you perhaps maybe once a year. Examine the totality of individuals that you have met and known, as well as many you have affected unknowingly, and you may begin to appreciate the probable source of the many non-objective signals influencing you at any given moment. Are your thoughts really your thoughts? The quality of the signals evidently varies greatly, based principally upon the degree of emotion present during transmission. The more intense the emotion, the greater the signal intensity. Sounds to me like Robert Monroe thinks magic works. That's what we call magic, but he's explaining it scientifically, right? The more intense the emotion, the greater the signal intensity. The question of good or bad does not alter the quality of transmission. The converse works in precisely the same fashion. You transmit to those of whom you think, and they are affected by what you think. Now think, and the word think here refers to those mental actions almost wholly at non-conscious levels, chiefly emotional and subjective in nature. When this kind of transmission and reception takes place consciously and willfully, it is labeled telepathy. Now, much is still unknown. Do reception and transmission increase tenfold during sleep? Maybe. Does the effect cease when a human entity dies? Does it extend to animals? For every answer, 100 questions are left unanswered. Yet this is the first step in an expanded concept of the physical life experience. Another premise of this book is the reality of the state, or the second state existence, or the, physical, non-physical body. So many, if not all, living human beings have a second body, for reasons yet unknown. And many, if not all, human beings temporarily separate from their physical bodies via the second body during sleep. This is done without conscious memory, except in rare instances. Far more rare are those instances when separation is obtained with conscious intent. However, the latter case poses some startling statistics and probabilities. It is inconceivable that one experimental ability is unique. If one person can perform this dissociative action, there must be others now living who can do the same, probably more efficiently. But how many others are there? Can one person in 1,000 do it? In 10,000? In 100,000? In 1,000,000? Let us assume that only one person in 1,000,000 can perform in the second body consistently and consciously. This means that as of this moment, there are more than 3,500 humans now living who can operate in the second body, probably better than I can. Now, here's where it gets trippy, because he's probably right about that number. Now, such a group, if organized, and this is what I've been trying to tell you guys for a long time, such a group, if organized, could control the destiny of mankind. This is Robert Monroe saying the same damn thing I've been telling you guys. Like, we can beat each other up politically, we can do all this shit, you know. But if we really focused on exploring consciousness and was able to get in a second state and then organized ourselves in that manner, we could change everything. Everything. Especially if we can affect the physical realm, which I believe we can. Such a group, if organized, could control the destiny of mankind, which leads to the question, are any of them organized now? And do they control our destiny? Before dismissing this as an absurdity or conspiracy, consider that I was able to affect another living human being physically in the pinching episode. If one can do this, so can others. And nothing more than a pinch at the right time in the right place in the physical body of another human being could change the world. It takes a little imagination to visualize a pinched cerebral artery in the brain as the cause of a stroke in a world leader. So here, he's right here talking about how to assassinate a world leader. You know, like say you get out of body, you go find another world leader and you pinch their freaking artery or whatever. They're done. Or a life-saving pinch in a hemorrhaging brain artery of another. All that is needed is the ability and the intent. If there are restraints or deterrents to such possible actions, they are not apparent. Further, a person operating in the second body can affect other human beings mentally. How much and in what manner is still uncertain. However, the experiments show that it can be done. Such effects may show and nothing more than sleep disturbances. They could result in unaccounted for compulsions, fears, neuroses, or irrational actions. From the data, it would seem that no more is needed than perfect techniques to systematically accomplish this at will. Perhaps, too, this has already been done. That's pretty scary, huh? Willful use of the second body then potentially yields power so great that other means are helpless against it. People wielding this power might well be able to suppress or divert any serious expanded study into this area of knowledge. Isn't this a trippy thought? Right? Like it really is. Let me see, I almost lost my spot here. Yeah, I think this is where he starts talking about like when he went and tried to see the president and stuff. If history is any indication, something is, okay, people wielding this power might well be able to suppress or divert any serious expanded study into this area of knowledge. Again, we can't, like, look over that. So if people, like if he's saying, like if people came together, got organized, and started doing this, people wielding this power would also be able to suppress or divert any serious expanded study into this area of knowledge. In other words, they could set things up to where no one else would be able to do it if they wanted to. They could divert everything. If history is any indication, something has already retarded growth in this direction. First, it was a wall of ignorance. Next came a veil of superstition, religions and things like that. And today, a double barrier exists. The suspicion of organized religion and the derision of recognized science. On the other hand, use of such power may be under the control and direction of animate, intelligent, or impersonal regulators and may preclude non-constructive interference. There are some indications that this may be the case, and we can only hope that it is. You guys remember, too, that I think it was that first manuscript by Manly P. Hall, what the ancient wisdom expects from its disciples, where he says that there's non-physical beings in these, quote, astral realms that are leading the destiny of man like a puppet show, kind of. I remember him saying something like that. To go back and listen to it, man. There are some indications that this may be the case. We can only hope that it is if there's other, like, intelligent, better regulators out there. But let us assume then that sophisticated man will undertake serious research of the second body or out-of-body experience. And one by one, others will learn the technique and the reality will become generally accepted. What then? First, man will be freed of all uncertainty of his relationship with God. His position relative to nature and the universe will be unequivocal knowledge. You won't have to be faith. You'll just know, He will know rather than believe whether death is a passing or a finality. And with such knowledge and expanded experience, religious conflict will be impossible. Quite probably Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, etc. will still retain much of their individuality and knowing that each has its place in locale too. However, each will at least understand how this is possible and that there are infinite variations in the spectrum. Each will rationalize by saying, quote, "That's what we've been trying to tell you all along." That's what they'll say. Prayer techniques may be rediscovered. Knowledge, rather than belief, could alter the altar procedure vitally. Man would then proceed systematically with his preparation for life in locale 2 on a sound basis, liberated from the misinterpretation of distorted visions subjectively experienced and are observed by uniformed and relatively uneducated fanatics many centuries ago. And in doing so, he may have to face facts both unpalatable, and uncomfortable. Traditional concepts of good and bad, right and wrong will undoubtedly be subject to radical redefinition. The truth may indeed hurt for a generation or so. The practice of medicine would be seriously affected. Recognition of a possible relationship between physical health and the second body would greatly influence the purely mechanical method of diagnosis and treatment. The exact relationship of the second body to the physical is not now known, but there is much to suspect. The growing results of the practice of psychosomatic medicine provide an additional clue. It is challenging to think of scientific precision in these fields. Well, if anything, I would say Joe Dispenza proved that, and also our very own family Void Walker member Gareth proved that. He sent me another message the other day and said he's moving his whole left arm. A year ago, he could barely breathe on his own. Now he's moving his whole left arm. He said his muscles are getting stronger, and if you have ALS, your muscles, they can't get stronger. And his neurologist has no idea what's going on. I don't think Gareth hasn't tapped into this stuff because I know he has. Psychologists and psychiatry would soon be unrecognizable under the impact of the second state data. And this area of human knowledge would be even more greatly affected than religion. Definitions of neurosis, psychosis, unconscious, superego, id may have to be revised or discarded, and early indications are that actual causes of mental illness may be uncovered rather than conclusively diagnosed on the basis of insufficient theory. It may well be that many of those labeled schizophrenics suffer from the sort of disease of the second body. And from the viewpoint of the second state, a physically conscious and awake human being who simultaneously receives impressions of locale 2 through some imperfection or cause yet unknown might well be unable to absorb this input of a double reality. So the voices that they hear, so many psychotics reportedly hear, may indeed be very real. Catatonia may be the simple effect of a disassociation of the second body on some unusual basis, as one would leave a house with all of the automatic equipment running and forget to return. That kind of, speaking of which, have you guys seen that movie K-Pax? I mean, it's an older movie, right? I think it's got Jeff Bridges as the psychologist and Kevin Spacey as this guy who claims to be an alien from this planet K-Pax. But he literally, when I mean, you have to watch it. It's so old you can't spoil it, but you need to watch it. But that would go right along with what Robert Monroe is saying, how that movie goes. Like when he leaves his body to go to the other planet, and then he leaves his body catatonic here. Catatonia may be the simple effect of a disassociation of the second body on some weird basis that we don't really know about. But the hallucinations of Persecution by the paranoiac might be very real interferences from boundary layer subhuman species in locale 2, and the result of some inadvertent breakdown in the barrier in a particular case. The workings of the mind itself, or the autonomic system operation, the actual brain function, the relationship of the superconscious, soul, or spirit, all may become common knowledge under this new concept. Advanced states of consciousness, such as have been proclaimed by mystics, philosophers, and the trippers. You know who the trippers are. He's calling them the trippers. Those are the psychonauts. Might become a daily achievement for those who so desire or can handle them. All of these possibilities are mild by comparison to the upheaval that would take place in the daily lives of every human being if the second body concept became an accepted fact. First, the sleeping third of our 24-hour living schedule would no longer be unfathomable. Perhaps we would still term it sleep, but at least we would know what we are doing. On the limited evidence, sleep is first of all a recharging process to the body. This may be performed by a disassociation of the second body quite automatically in varying degrees of distances. In one case, it may separate only a fraction of an inch. In others, such distances may be limitless by our physical standards of measurement. How such separation can act as a regenerant is not yet known. Nor is it known why some take distant, quote, trips or visits while others remain close to their bodies. There seems to be two explanations of what we now call dreams. First, the common dream may be some computer-type action of the unconscious in sorting out recently perceived data. Second, there are vividly recalled experiences now called dreams, which may actually be impressions received by the second body while traveling in the release state. There may be many other varieties or subclassifications yet to be learned. Only research in this direction will determine this. In any event, our luxurious or frightening period called sleep will be understood for what it truly is, and the result may be an adjustment of our sleep needs. Perhaps only 2 hours out of the 24 will be needed with this new understanding. But I've also heard a lot of meth heads say that to me too. You only need 2 hours of sleep, man. Yeah, Robo, you've seen K-Pax, right? K-Pax goes along with what his previous theory a minute ago. That's a good movie. New studies may have been shown that 5 minutes of deliberate sleep every hour is a far more efficient method of recharging, and the 8-hour night cycle could be nothing more than the habitual result of environment. Second state studies should resolve such questions. Another premise of this text is the existence of a third force. This is the energy means by which the second body operates and is quite probably fundamental in the thought process. It is not known whether this force is generated by living entities or is an ever-present field force, modulated in some manner by such beings. It does, however, have some notable characteristics. It bears a distinct relationship to electricity and magnetism. It might be conceived of as a third of a triad which is cyclic. Electricity is to magnetism as magnetism is to force X, as force X is to electricity. Hence the label third force, which I did not originate. The trinity of our theologies may have begun when this was common knowledge in ages past and subsequently distorted in retelling. Given this interaction with electricity and magnetism, it seems probable that the existence of one part of the triad creates secondary or tertiary patterns among the other two. So it may be that when we think, we are utilizing this third force, which then is only slightly represented in purely electrical or magnetic form. It is presumed that this third force action can be detected and measured by instruments already developed. To date, this has not been attempted in a serious, consistent study. On the other hand, there is no evidence that strong applications of electricity or magnetism or any combinations of electromagnetic radiation generate significant amount of the third force. They do, however, appear to act upon the latter in much the same manner as light is affected. Experiments with the only known transducer, the human mind, show consciousness constantly trying to symbolize this third force in terms of electricity and vibration. It, quote, sees and, quote, feels electric conductors, flashes, and often actual physical shock in attempting to translate this energy field into known experience. In one test, as noted, a disassociation in movement in the second body was attempted from within a charged Faraday cage, where the physical body was completely surrounded by a strong DC electrical field. And it was found that the movement through the charged walls of the cage while in the second body was impossible. With the charge removed, there was no problem. Yeah, you remember that there were a few times, too, when he got out of body when he was trying to, like, travel out of body, he got tangled up in wires and shit. So I think he's probably on to something with this, too, so. Or what he perceived to be wires, right? In early stages of experimentation, attempts to move any distance in the second body were restricted by what seemed to be an interlacing barrier of power cables. That's what I was talking about. And lines overhead, much like those found in so many streets in older cities and towns. One of the factors in extension of distance from the physical body lay in recognizing the nature of this barrier and its relationship to electromagnetic radiation. The mind, perceiving such forces for the first time, interpreted them as wires. And once identified, passage through the barrier became relatively simple, though. The correlation is also indicated by the reported experience of the second body positioned over the street, later confirmed by physical inspection, and moving along the magnetic field of higher voltage, primarily power lines, overhead. So whenever encountered during the second state, third force manifestation has been perceived and interpreted first as electricity. And to date, there is no proven method of measurement or detection of this third force, and there will not be until the possibility of the existence of this third and the Trinity is seriously considered. Let's see. Yeah, we're almost done with this one, then I'll take a break here in a second. Yeah. So the final premise of this book, this is the final, is the existence of Locale 2, which is something Wolf and I talked about. I think Wolf, Bryce, and I we were all talking about it last night, trying to figure out what the hell Locale 2 even is between 1 and 3, you know. But the reality is a concept of proportions inconceivable to the conscious human mind. Yet all experiments inescapably point to this conclusion. It is not difficult to recognize Locale 2 as the subject of man's dreams and contemplations throughout history. Nor is it difficult. I think Locale 2 is what a lot of people call the astral realm. You know, like there's, in my opinion, not Robert's, but Locale 1 is like this, is the etheric. It's this place. Locale 2 is the astral. That's where everybody's like, all their shit's tied together and you're trying to go through it. And Locale 3 seemed to be some kind of weird other dimension or something. But so anyways, it's not difficult to recognize Locale 2 as the subject of man's dreams and all our contemplations throughout history put together in one place, but nor is it difficult to understand the varying patterns ascribed to it and the countless attempts to translate this great unknown and recognizable terms. From the present evidence, it can be truly both heaven and hell, just as our present environment can be. The most important factor seems to be that the greater part of Locale 2 is really neither of the two. It is not known from the experiments to date whether everyone who dies automatically goes, in quotation, goes to Locale 2. Also, there is no present evidential material to indicate that the presence of a human personality in Locale 2 is permanent. It may be that, like an eddy or vortex, we gradually lose energy and eventually just dissipate into the Locale 2 medium once we leave Locale 1, or the here and now. It is conceivable that the result of this process would grant recognition of immortality and that we survive the grave, but maybe not forever. And perhaps the stronger the formation of the personality, the longer the, quote, life in this different state of being. Thus, it could be that survival is both reality and an illusion. The scope of Locale 2 seems limitless. Under the conditions encountered thus far, there seem to be no means to measure or calculate the breadth and depth of this strange, familiar place. Yeah, I think I went there before I was born, or I was there too, you know. Movement from section to section is too instantaneous to allow any estimates or to observe relative spatial positions of one area to another. And as far as can be ascertained, there is no conjunctive relationship between places in locale 2 and this physical universe. They may or may not coincide site to site, but certainly this non-material realm does not have its center the earth upon which we live. Rather, it would seem that one very small portion envelops our physical world, and thus is our maybe port of entry. And at this stage, I believe it is impossible for human consciousness to comprehend fully the reality of locale 2. It would be like asking a computer to work on an analog for which it has not been programmed. Consciousness, as we have developed to date, is not prepared for this kind of comprehension. That's not to say, however, that such consciousness cannot or will not be forthcoming. By training in now obscure or yet to be formulated techniques, consciousness might well be deepened or expanded to recognize and accept this reality. But on the other hand, I'm quite sure that the subconscious, unconscious, superconscious, superego, soul, or whatever our non-material non-consciousness is called, is generally quite aware of and familiar with locale 2. How much this awareness affects our conscious thought has been contemplated by our most revered philosophers, and many suggest that it dominates our waking actions. The records of the experiments seem to bear this out. We are masters of ourselves, but not at the conscious level. Our actions in locale 2 may have forceful bearings on our daily activities, completely unrecognized by the conscious self. There are literally hundreds of pages of experimental notes relating to locale 2 visits, much of which are still beyond translation into locale 1 thought patterns. Undoubtedly, most of them also deal with that portion which attracts this personal self. Like attracts like, which is but a fraction of the whole. And I guess you would say the final premise of this book is the existence of a contradiction. We share with animals and all living things a common prime command. Going back to the moment of conception, it supersedes any other instinct that we have. The command, indelibly etched in our being, is survive. It was this dynamic that created the fear barrier, which had to be overcome before willful separation could take place. For an out-of-the-body experience was very much like death, which might be called the ultimate failure to comply with the command of survive. To satisfy the survival drive, we eat. We often eat compulsively because it's one way to respond to the prime command when threatened with something other than starvation. We translate this command into the accumulation and defense of material possessions. The drive to reproduce answers the command in another manner. Any danger to the ego calls forth the automatic mechanisms of defense or denial. The familiar fight or flee is the physical reaction to the survival imprint. Survival as the prime command means avoidance of death by whatever method available. The contradiction is that the principal idealistic notions of man, the noble virtues, all the great acts, all have as their base the denial and a rejection of this prime command. The man who gives to another his bread, who provides for his family at the cost of an early death, who gives of himself to community and country without direct benefit, who deliberately endangers and possibly sacrifices his life for others, has done the right thing. Therefore, doing the right thing, the human act most respected, the most godlike by our standards, is in direct violation of God's prime command of all nature. So men, stop sacrificing yourself for everybody. Moreover, to compound the contradiction, it is impossible to achieve the second state without subjugation and or subordination of the survival drive in its most basic forms. DNA, somehow, you have the wires crossed, my friend. And from these fundamentals, 1,000 secondary premises come to the surface like bubbles rising from the primordial mass below the organic rubble on the ocean floor. Through layer upon layer of sedimentary misconception, they seep upward into light. It is better to burn the evidence, to ignore it, right? Or, with all the existing potentials, try to widen the doorway, maybe. But with the latter comes this probability. In the year 2025, A boy in and he has 2025 in here. Isn't that crazy? In the year 2025, a boy in Locale 1 pushes a button on a device, much like a portable radio. I perceive the signal and turn my attention to him. Hi there, son. I greet him warmly, and my great-grandchild smiles in recognition. Ooh, think about that for a minute. That's kind of synchro, too, that he actually wrote the year 2025, and we're reading that in the year 2025. All right. So, lots to think about there. I think he's got some good points, for sure. You have to remember, like, he got out quite a bit. And these notes in this first book are only part of his notes. It's like they were scattered, around the years and stuff, but it was more of the beginning introductory notes. Like when you get into the second and third books, he has to make up like a whole different language for you to kind of even understand some of the experiences that he's having in this realm. So I'm just going to do a just like a real quick short restroom break, and then we'll do the epilogue, and then we'll be done with some bitch. We'll be done with this book together. You and I together. Taking the Journeys Out of the Body road with Robert Monroe. Real quick. Be right back. With his mind and his belief, and I honestly think that, I don't know, I can't wait to like really get into a conversation with him. Maybe there'll be some way we can have him on the show, or maybe I can just keep relaying the messages. But if you think about it, like what Gareth is achieving is a lot of what Monroe's talking about here in a certain sense, and a lot of the stuff that we've talked about in a certain sense. The man's all heart. And we all love you, brother. Keep it up. So we're going to set the record straight as we close out Journeys Out of the Body by Robert Monroe. And if you've taken this journey with us from beginning to end, God bless you. But the journey will continue, but this is just the beginning. But let's set the record straight first about Robert Monroe. Okay? One, he's not a Catholic priest. So for all you people that are out there saying, I know Robert Monroe, he's this or that, like you don't know what you're talking about. Like you're looking at a totally different Robert Monroe. This guy, Robert Monroe, presented himself to us at the Topeka Veterans Administration Hospital, and this epilogue is from psychiatrists, by the way, So Robert Monroe presented himself to us at the Topeka Veterans Administration Hospital Research Department so that we could learn more about the relationship between his personality and his out-of-body experiences. The primary goal of our investigation was an in-depth psychological evaluation. Monroe was highly cooperative and open during the intensive interviewing and batteries of different psychological tests which were aimed at examining the depths of his unconscious mind, his value structures, his fantasy life, and the humanistic or self-actualizing aspects of his mind. So remember that when you're being evaluated by a shrink, and a really good one, that's what they're looking for. We did conduct a brief psychophysiological experiment with him, which I'll report on. In reviewing the immense amount of material we have on his life, I have attempted to extract threads or themes of summary. Certain points about his experiences which make them somewhat different from others reported should be noted. Monroe, a 60-year-old businessman, had a relatively solid, orthodox Southern upbringing, although certain features of his life indicate that he was an unusual person from a very early age with unevenly developed intellectual and emotional abilities and an unusually mature sense of person and independence. He reports that his first out-of-body experience occurred during his adult years. Another point of difference, since in our work we have found that many people associate to the out-of-body or similar experiences during their childhood. First experiences are often, hold on, let me make sure I'm reading this right. First experiences are often associated with severe physical illness, childbirth, various drugs, including anesthetics, or extreme states perceived as a psychological or physical threat to the person. Robert Monroe appeared not to be suffering from any severe physical illness at the time he had his first out-of-body experience. He was, however, at age 42, in the midst of midlife adjustments and changes. It should also be noted that as a child he had severe scarlet fever, an illness that is associated with a high temperature. And from his own account, he was quite ill, although his mother, a physician, was able to look after him outside the hospital. In addition, later in his life, Monroe has had some evidence of arteriosclerotic narrowing of the blood vessels to his brain, which could create a state of low oxygenation known to precipitate these sorts of experiences. The way in which Monroe utilizes his experiences is what is unusual. If we were to have such experiences, most of us would be extremely scared and attempt to avoid them. It is significant that initially Monroe's repeated visits to physicians and an attempt to explain these unusual experiences were motivated by the intellectual and medical orientation of his parents. It is striking how the behavior of human beings reflect an attempt to understand, by action and experiment, the dominant preoccupations of their unconscious minds. Remember, the unconscious mind is running the show, always is. You know, the part of us, the part of me that we're thinking and talking, we think they're in control of everything. It ain't shit. It ain't running nothing. One of the most consistent themes in Monroe's history and his interest in the air. The air is his medium. From an early age, he built model planes, learned to fly airplanes in high school, and later became an accomplished glider pilot. This is something I've noticed in people who have direct personal out-of-body experiences as opposed to those who study or research the phenomenon. I've noticed that not only do they generally have such childhood fantasy experiences as playing with imaginary friends and seeing fairies, but also they often remember fantasies of wanting to fly like a bird and report an increased number of flying and falling dreams. Another significant theme in Monroe's life is his preoccupation with movement. In reviewing his family background, he became very excited as his childhood recollections, especially of riding on trains. Movement themes are common throughout his life, as they were in psychological test materials. Monroe had many unevenly developed talents, and from an early age he was extremely independent. His father, an academic, was quiet and authoritative, an excellent parental model with an even temper. His mother was a physician and more in control of the family, though not in a dominant, aggressive way. Monroe appeared to be able to actualize his individual talents in a manner somewhat unusual in traditional families. His parents allowed him a considerable degree of latitude, somehow recognizing his unusual talents, particularly his mechanical ability, which appeared not to be represented in anyone else in his immediate family. He had two elder sisters, and the elder of whom was quite competitive with him, and he had a very much younger brother. Some of his unevenly developed talents included his ability to read and write at the age of 4. In spite of this, his school performance was quite average until he developed a relationship with a teacher at a college whom he felt accepted and guided him. He then became a straight-A student. He was a leader of his peers as a child and highly creative, constantly searching for answers. He was self-generating, as so many people in this field are. He also demonstrated a common characteristic of people exploring altered states of consciousness, and that was that he listened to and acted on his own subjective experience. In other words, he appeared to believe his own experience and would quite independently and with a great deal of faith pursue what he felt. We have found in our work with people capable of having out-of-body experiences out-of-body experiences that certain personality attributes are present, and Monroe does not demonstrate these. These include a tendency, does demonstrate these. These include a tendency to feel socially isolated and different from others at quite an early age, often seeing the world itself as somewhat alien. This, God, I don't know how many times I've heard people in this community say that too, though. This relative isolation is combined with a tendency to be autonomous, and yet also to be a leader, quite aggressive and danger-seeking. Monroe has been able to take some experiences which most people would try to deny and avoid, and place them in a highly creative context, utilizing his leadership abilities and his other constitutional attributes. People such as Monroe are thus able to utilize their internal mental experiences for guidance in their lives. Monroe has no special training in Eastern, meditative, or other esoteric disciplines, but somehow uses these institutions and these intuitions. Monroe, as others, is a visualizer, a person who visually memorizes and thinks in gestalts. His dreams are also visual, highly colored, and intense. Perhaps one of the commonest themes in Monroe's life is his security and not having to continuously define the external world. This attitude has given him the ability to journey through realities normally not accessible to people whose lives necessitate, for one reason or another, a continual definition of the physical external world. Monroe's early life also demonstrates not only independence, but stubbornness and a tendency to rebel against traditional values. Although there is no evidence whatsoever that this rebellion, mainly internal, created major problems in his life. He does not demonstrate any major trauma during his childhood, nor any of the sorts of childhood difficulties that a psychiatrist might look for. I think this results from an excellent relationship with his parents, who did not have a normal middle-class attitude to life and were themselves quite independent. His mother, a dynamic woman, tended to step over the ugly things in life, an attribute that emerges in the analysis of Monroe's personality. It appears that Monroe and his mother use what could be called in traditional psychiatric terms denial or avoidance, except that it is done consciously and does not appear to have created difficulties for either his mother or himself. Yeah, I bet Monroe was probably labeled one of those, you're a conflict avoidant, and yet he just tried to stay positive and, it's more probably like him and his mother realized there's certain shit you just can't do anything about, especially all that bad shit you're worried about, so bump on, He has a tendency to bring out the best in people by an oblique form of communication in which he focuses his attention on that which will synthesize rather than that which will destroy. Man of my own heart. He had no major childhood traumas, although one experience he reports as highly traumatic was that of moving from a small to a large city. He went to college at the age of 15, entering pre-medical school. He eventually qualified himself as an engineer with very good grades, although his courses were quite unorthodox. Monroe's pre-adult and early adult life was one of an entrepreneur. He started a theater, produced and directed many programs for radio and television, started and lost a number of businesses, each time being able to collect around himself people who would help him. This independent, our religious, non-psychic, non-esoteric, typical American dream development appears to have set Monroe up well for the sorts of direct and simple observations that are so well demonstrated in his book and his later works. In his relationship with himself, his own closely knit and dedicated family, and other colleagues and friends, there is an emphasis on the importance of personal relationships rather than material possessions, and an overall tendency to see human beings as good. If only more people were like that. An emphasis on the importance of personal relationships rather than material possessions. All right, anyways, let's continue with what the psychiatrist is saying. So how can Monroe accept these highly esoteric journeys described in his book and at the time be the almost traditional successful businessman and father who is not a freak or does not wear unusual clothes and does not constantly put himself on stage for examination of his special abilities? He pursues relentlessly his own research, makes his own contacts, and takes responsibility for his own life. One psychological test shows him to have the profile of a self-actualizing individual with a particular emphasis on his ability to see apparent opposites of life as meaningfully related, an unusually high test score. Monroe also demonstrated elements that we have noticed in people who lead developments in the field of altered states of consciousness, and that is a tendency to keep some intensive emotions in the unconscious split and sealed off. Part of seeing opposites as meaningful also involves keeping them discrete and utilizing the energy of the tension between the split opposites for creative endeavors. Sounds real familiar, don't it? Often such people demonstrate intensive thoughts and feelings with a sensitivity to criticism. That's true. So, test examinations of his attitudes to death indicated that, compared with the normal population, Monroe's anxiety and fear of death is very low. Some writings and studies of people with out-of-body experiences have laid considerable emphasis on the denial of death. On one level, this appears logical, especially in the reported studies of people whose first experiences have often occurred in life-threatening situations, or situations that many of us never face in the course of our lives. Perhaps the experience becomes deeply imprinted in the mind and may make the unconscious mind continually afraid that the event may happen again. But deeper analysis of Monroe's psychological test findings demonstrate no evidence of fear of imminent death or an attempt to deny death, but mainly to contain and control and utilize intensively split emotions within his unconscious mind. A part of a break from the intensive psychological investigation, we conducted a brief experiment in the psychophysiological laboratory of the hospital with a psychologist, Dr. Fowler Jones of the Kansas University Medical Center, as co-observer. We simply asked Monroe to put himself into the state of mind he defined as out of body. We had him hooked up to a polygraph and took some brainwave tracings and measurements of his anxiety level and level of alertness, which is called a GSR. We observed him through a one-way mirror over a 30-minute time period. Can you imagine some dude sitting behind like a one-way mirror looking at him all plugged up? Get out of body. Don't worry, you'll be fine. We'll wait until it happens. I don't see how anybody could get out of body and like that, but most striking was his slow rate of breathing and his intensive depth of relaxation. His breathing was shallow, and he had periods in which he would not breathe at all, and then would take a few gulping breaths at about the same time as a technician entered the room to tell us that the brainwave tracings were changing. Dr. Jones and I simultaneously had the impression of a heat wave-like distortion of Monroe's, a heat wave-like distortion of Monroe's upper body, while the lower part of his body was clearly in focus to us. This distortion lasted until approximately 2 minutes before the termination of the experiment. Monroe had stated that he would be able to get out of his body very quickly, but he could not signal, although he could signal with 5 seconds of return, which he did. This signal correlated with a change again in his brain waves. Since there were problems in hookup, the technician entered the room during the experiment to check the attachment of the leads. It was interesting to note that as the technician was attempting to adjust the leads, there was no record whatsoever that this affected Monroe's arousal level on the GSR. From a technical point of view, while out of body, Monroe's GSR level showed an arousal of approximately 150 microvolts and was marked by a total absence of either specific or non-specific responses once the experiment began, even when the technician actually touched his body to adjust the electrode placements. And this is most unusual as the GSR is highly sensitive to such interferences. So the dude was so relaxed, basically, that even when they were touching him, he was out of body. Like he wasn't feeling his body at all, probably. After re-entering his body, Monroe was slightly disoriented with blurring of his speech and could not recapture or describe his experiences immediately, although later he did describe that he had left the experimental room and entered the room where the polygraph and technicians were located. It is also noteworthy in comparing Monroe with reports of other people who are adept at the out-of-body experiences that prior to the beginning of this brief, informal psychophysiological experiment, Monroe had demonstrated his ability to move the needles of sensitive volmeters by waving his hand over them. Holy shit. He's he's electrified or something. So these sorts of energy manipulations might also explain some of the technical problems created in the highly sensitive apparatus, which often goes wrong in such experiments. It is almost as if energy is rampant and not under the full control of either the experimenter or the subject. A computer analysis of Monroe's brain waves demonstrated that most of his brain energy was in the 4 to 5 theta frequency range, which nothing at all above 10 cycles per second. He focused brain energy in a very narrow frequency band. We've also found a similar phenomenon in experiments with Monroe's soundstrobe tape system. Monroe was doing this experiment without his tapes, but apparently could focus his consciousness so that his brain power was in a very narrow frequency band. And at the time, the technician noticed that change in the EEG, there appeared to be a shift in energy from the left to the right side of his brain. His ordinary EEG was quite normal, with no evidence of epilepsy and no evidence of unusual responses to overbreathing or light stimulation. A later statistical analysis of these EEG tracings, or analysis of variance, showed that in terms of the frequency of brain waves, there was no particular difference between the right and left side of his brain, but that during the time he was out of the body, the frequency of his brain waves was considerably slower. During the out-of-body period, the variations in frequency of his brain waves were considerably smaller, and the variation being much less on the right side of his brain than on the left. The differences were highly statistically significant. What does this mean? Essentially, this brief experiment showed that Monroe was able, during a state he defined as out-of-body, to focus his brain energy into a narrow frequency band and to produce visible distortions of his body, observed by 2 people independently under low illumination conditions. Wait a minute, so other people saw him out of body? Let me just, hold on. I hate rereading shit. I know you guys don't like it either, but I want to make sure I read that right. This debrief experiment showed that Monroe was able, during a state he defined as the out-of-body, to focus his brain energy into a narrow frequency band, okay, and to produce visible distortions of his body, observed by 2 people independently under low light. Maybe that's, damn, okay. So maybe that was that gray thing that other people saw when he was moving out. Like, he actually turned into a damn ghost, and some people saw it. He was able to achieve an unusually deep state of physical relaxation, which is what he claims to do in his Focus 10 tape condition. It is almost as if his body were comatose rather than asleep. In other experiments, we have found different types of brainwave responses to what is defined as the out-of-body, but they all seem to have one thing in common. There is a slowing in the brainwaves and a shifting of energy focus. In summary, it can be said of Monroe that his energetic life with a high sense of purpose and his need for a relentless desire for understanding is a good demonstration of what W.R. Inge once said, quote, "One test is infallible. Whatever view of reality deepens our senses of the tremendous issues of life and the world wherein we move is for us nearer the truth than any view which diminishes that sense." End quote. The epilogue was written by Stuart W. Twemlow, M.D., psychiatrist, Chief of Research Service, Topeka VA Hospital, Faculty, Menninger School of Psychiatry. Boom. That's it. That is the end of Journeys Out of the Body. I know I've seen some of you take this whole ride with us here too, so thank you. I appreciate that. Taking this ride with us. Pretty trippy, man. This whole thing's been pretty trippy. I just think that, like, if you really go through the first book, it sets the whole damn record straight about Robert Monroe's, not just what happened to him, like in his first out-of-body experiences, but his whole train of thought, his mentality, and even what other people are writing about him. You know, it's not like he's a freaking saint or someone needs to worship him, but it is important that when we're trying to figure out the truth, the type of, I guess, procedures and character and everything else that this book really represents. I think this book definitely sets the record straight on the out-of-body experience. Nowadays, it's, you know, there's so many people that know so much about it, But I think we should, like as far as what's out there beyond our physical bodies and all this other stuff, but I think we should all just focus on being able to achieve the separation state and forget everything else, or forget about, what we think is really out there. And until we get enough like people doing that, then we could do like he was talking about in the previous chapter. You can get a bunch of organized people that can actually start experimenting together. Good stuff. That's the end of it, man. Aren't you glad it's over? We're not done with it, though. We're going to keep journeying with Robert Monroe, but we're done with Journeys Out of the Body. We shan't, can't, and won't ever read this on the air again, probably. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Aren't you happy it's over, Bryce, Alan? Aren't you guys happy? I'm stoked.
I'm not happy it's over. I want more.
I want more. Well, we'll see. Here's the thing. I will attempt to read like Far Journeys, but there has to be more discussion. And the reason why I say this is because when we get into Far Journeys, which is more of his out of body notes, like the second book is a lot more just experiences, but his experiences are so crazy that he has to make up like a key. You know what I'm talking about? Like if you look at a map and it has certain symbols that mean certain things on the map, right? Like a key. So in order for him to translate some of his experiences in the second book, he had to make, and that's actually the second and third book, he had to make a key. So we have to, maybe before each time, we have to clearly define what those words mean. Like click means he just appears somewhere, so he'll say click in the book. Sometimes he'll say he rolled, and that means he kind of laughed, like what the I guess out of body experience laugh would be. A rote is like a program. We'll get into it, but it's some pretty intense, heavy shit, man. But yeah, I'm kind of sad that it's over. I listen to this audiobook once a year. And by the way, if you want to get a better experience, like a full experience, listen to the Crossroads Press audiobook. You can get it for free by clicking the link in the description. Get an Audible trial, listen to the book. If you don't want to keep Audible, cancel it. Whatever, but maybe I just do it for sentimental reasons now.
You know what's cool about Audible is you get so many credits a month.
Yeah, I love it, man.
And then if you cancel Audible, you get to keep the books you bought.
Really? I didn't know that.
I'm pretty sure I'll have to cancel Audible and try that out. But I'm thinking that's
what the hell was that? Thanks, Ari, for the super chat. Appreciate it, brother. That was a crazy noise, whatever that was. Zaya Bonanza. Well, the end is merely a new beginning. Fire the constant amidst life by the guiding light of Zool. Or soul. You know what you ought to do, Zaya? You ought to do fortune cookies. You're pretty good at that stuff. I can hear Robert Monroe now on the moon looking at us, yelling for us to come on over. Hell yeah, man. If you're getting out of body, that's when I first got out of body, that was one of the damn things like I wanted to do. So I started like getting around in the yard, and then I wanted to go straight toward the freaking moon, man. But I wasn't ready to go that far. Actually, it got stupid when I tried it, but that's where I wanted to go, was the damn moon. And if I ever get out of this yard, I want to go to Egypt and I want to go to the moon in the astral. That'd be dope. Appreciate you guys' support. Anything else you want to say before we wrap it up, Bryce Aroni? Ooh, I called you that on air, didn't I? My bad.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
Bryce Aroni, my brother.
I'm good. I'm good.
Cool. See, here's my plan. Once we get done with these Monroe texts, like, I ain't even gonna tell you guys, because I'm known for like saying shit and then I change my plan and I ain't doing it. But I'll just say that it's the fuel to the fire for like Lighting the Void, or perhaps Fringe FM version 2.0. You know what I mean? Thanks, Robo1776 for the 10. Thank you, brother. Also, you guys, like, if there's something that a guest besides Darius Wright, here's the thing. If you could find me a guest that I haven't talked to, even if, or maybe I hadn't just talked to in a while, but a guest, even if it's you, that's had like a story or something, you know, tell me, like, email me, right? Or hit me up in Discord, or just email lightingthevoid@gmail.com, right? I want to hear like personal stories. Now, if I've heard your alien abduction story a million times, or how awesome of a psychic you are a million times, you know who I'm talking to. No. I mean, I want to hear like your personal one story that changed your life, like your out of body experience, or maybe a Mel's Hole type story, or anything. If you guys know any stuff, any cool stuff like that, just hit me up. Like, email me, or give me the email of the person, or maybe it's you, whatever. I'll definitely bring them on the show. But what I don't want to do is keep talking to the same people about the same stuff, or keep promoting everyone's new spiritual business, because that's what this thing turns into, is you're just promoting everybody's spiritual tarot business or their whatever business, and it gets so unauthentic and so ingenuine that all of the good stories and experiences go out the window. And I don't want that to happen. Okay. Not saying I won't talk to people that have businesses or anything. Surely I will, but it has to be about the damn experience in the story. First and foremost. Always. There was a little mouse in my kitchen garbage can just now. Really? Maybe we'll do, since some of you guys are already saying, well, I've got one. Maybe we'll do a night where we can all just share our stuff too, you know? Like, share our experiences together. We used to do that. Anyways, got to roll out. 99 Sweet Dreams, thanks for your support. Robo, thanks for your support. Aria, as always, man, appreciate it. You're freaking keeping this thing alive, you guys. Tamishi, thanks for rejoining up, brother. You're a man of your word. Love you. I put it outside in the bushes. Oh, you let the mouse go? Good for you. I wouldn't have killed it either. Night, y'all. Sweet dreams. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other.
Tombstones climbing up the sky to claim the boredom and the whine of the radiator, to freeze the fates that intertwine, unresolved and undefined in this echo chamber. Once you've given up the ghost, just like Lazarus, you'll know there's an operator, some strange passenger inside. To that strange power I'm resigned like an iron anchor. I'm just a ghost in your stereo, the fading memory of a shipwreck in the undertow. You're just a lost song I wrote, and I'm just a ghost in your stare.